Good evening. Thank you all for coming. It's a nice crowd. My name's Jeremy Martin. I'm the Planning and Development Director for the town of Camden. I'm kind of leading up the town's climate resiliency work, if you will. I'm really thankful for this group, Molly Mulhern in particular, who is kind of organized CamdenCAN, stands for Camden Climate Action Now. She's a partner with the town. This group is really appreciative of their efforts and getting the word out on this work. We are partners in this. I'm going to participate with other town staff on a December 7th event at the Camden Public Library. And I really want to thank this group. What a group we have here from all over the Mid-Coast. Thank you for coming. And if you have any questions, I'm here to help. I will try to ask the questions that may come in on Zoom. Other than that, I'm going to turn it over to Molly, who's been a great partner in this, and we'll get on the town of Camden stuff on the 7th of December.
Yeah. So I want to thank Jeremy in the back and thank you all for coming. CamdenCAN is a group of all of you. It's a citizens-led initiative. We got our inspiration from all of these good folks up here because around the state, there's really good climate action going on, and it's from citizens to school kids to paid staff. So we thought we'd put this on to sort of give a taste of that to the people that are here with us tonight, but also to the wider community so that people can understand how much it takes to think and talk about these. So as Jeremy said, we have a panel December 7th that will focus on Camden work. Tonight we're elsewhere. And I also just want to say going forward, we have a survey underway. We have a newsletter that we publish. In the winter and spring, we'll be doing much more community action. And we'd invite all of you who are here tonight or interested to join us for those actions. And that right now, I'd just like to introduce one of our steering committee in CamdenCAN is Esperanza Stanchioff. She's going to moderate this fine group. I've had the pleasure of working with Esperanza for the last several months. She's a Camden resident. She is an extreme professional at UMaine. I'm looking at Parker because UMaine lost her because she retired, but it's our blessing because she can help us in the town. So with no further ado, I'm going to say thank you to Esperanza and the rest of the CamdenCAN steering committee that's here for work for this tonight. And I'm really looking forward to what we hear. So thank you.
Okay, I get to do the fun stuff like time people. So, no, I want to also say thank you so much for all of you to be here. It's really exciting to bring this group together. And we're fortunate to have regional neighbors who have been tackling both how to curb our greenhouse gas emissions as well as adapt to the impacts that we're already experiencing. A motto or a saying that I heard and I appreciate very much is climate resiliency requires social resiliency. I'll say that again. Climate resiliency requires social resiliency. And these communities that are speaking this evening exemplify that. I have also had the privilege of working with all but one of these communities in the past, and it's been exciting. So we'll hear from all the speakers first, and then we'll open it up to your questions, and we'll take them one at a time, obviously. And so we'll start with Belfast. And so we have 5 communities, 5 coastal communities, as you can tell, 5 people up there. And we have they're all coastal, and we have bookended 2 cities and 2 islands and 1 town. So we're covering the gamut here. So John Beal of Belfast is a retired attorney who worked at the National Labor Relations Board office in Boston and later practiced in Maine, representing labor unions, workers, and disabled persons. He is currently helping raise organic strawberries and other fruit in Belfast. John was a founding member in 2018 and chair from 2019 to 2021 of Belfast's Climate Crisis Committee, and is currently chair of its successor, Belfast Climate, Energy, and Utilities Committee. So thank you, John, for being here, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Esperanza. Esperanza gave us a number of subjects to cover, and I'm not going to cover them one at a time. I'm just going to tell you the story of our committee, and most of the answers will come there. In the summer of 2017, 3 of us were graduates from the Belfast Bay Watershed Coalition Stewards Program, which you may or may not have heard of. But it's a program where you go around multiple facilities throughout Maine and study their climate impacts. And one of the obligations is that after you graduate, you have to do at least 30 hours of work doing something climatous. So we sat down and talked. We decided we would start a climate committee because Belfast did not have any city or other group specifically focused on abatement or adaptation to climate change. So we were fortunate to have a brand new mayor, Samantha Paradis, who was willing to start a new program with us. We talked a long time for whether or not it should be a city committee or a private committee, like a 501c3. And we eventually decided that a city committee would be more likely to have an actual effect on city policy. There are lots of 501c3s around. They do great work, but being actually in the city power structure, we thought might be more useful. So we did that. We started the committee in March of 2018. The city council approved our existence. We adopted a mission statement where our mission is educating the community, engaging the community, collecting local data, offering recommendations to city council, and collaborating whenever possible with other groups. One of the first things that we did was the mayor joined the Global Covenant of Mayors, which is a worldwide group aimed at carrying out the 2015 Paris Agreement that our president had just abandoned. So we joined that, and we had 2 general projects. One was addressing sea level rise in Belfast Bay, and the other was education. To address sea level rise, we first did a 3-part study of the hydrology, the estimates as to what and when and how high and with what surge water would increase. And we issued those reports and had a public meeting about them. One of the immediate effects of the report was we had said in the report that we needed more local data because, as you know, the only tide gauges that cover Penobscot Bay are Portland and Bar Harbor, and the rest is extrapolated. So we wanted local numbers. It happened that Gulf of Maine Research Institute got a hold of our report and came to us and said, gee, we'd like to help. So they were dealing with NOAA, the Weather Service. Weather Service wanted to ground truth their predictions. So when they said we're going to have a surge of X feet, they wanted us to figure out if that happened. So we did a program on coastal flooding with GMRI. We developed 6 different sites along our coast to take pictures during high tides, and we reported back the information to NOAA. One of the things that Esperanza asked us to do was to give you an advice as to one important thing to do. I would say, from my point of view, the most important thing is to tell people what you're doing, because all of the interesting stuff that we've gotten to do has been a result of other people hearing what we're doing and saying, hey, we'd like to help. So we had GMRI, and then the Army Corps of Engineers came up to us and said, we're doing a project to monument the 1978 highest tides, and we want Belfast to be one of the spots. So we did that. Next slide, please. By the way, that's our breakwater. That's one of the sites for the coastal flooding. So we worked with the Army Corps and we developed 2 different high water markers. And on it, we also had a chart as to where a similar surge in 2050 or 2100 would come with sea level rise. We had a little difficulty with that placard because the then administration did not want us to use the word climate change. Fortunately, we finished the project after a change of administration, so we were able to say climate change. So picture 3, please. Another aspect of data collection was we wanted to have a weather station. So we put in a really good weather station onto the pier. These are 2 of the members of my committee who put it in. And by the way, when you put the observation posts in, we had a lot of high school students help us dig the holes. We were trying to engage high school kids. And another way we engaged them was, next, we wanted, okay, so we have weather data, but we want to get tide data. So we put in, the city council and GMRI supported us in buying a radar set for measuring water level height. And at the same time, the high school kids built their own ultrasonic tidal measurer. And both of these are funneled through the harbor master's office. And so we're creating a permanent, long-term picture of water level in Belfast Bay. The idea being to know how it's changing in real time, in real place, and not just extrapolating from Bar Harbor. So another effect of having this water level was U.S. Harbors from Rockland contacted us, and they were going to put together water level sensors for Tennant's Harbor, Rockland, Rockport, Camden, and Belfast. And we installed with their GPS running water level sensor. First, it was a German company, and then they changed to a Hawaiian company. And it still hasn't really gotten off the ground just because of internal administrative difficulties. But so at one point we had 3 different tide levels being measured, which is good. So the second activity I said was education. And beginning in 2018, we've had probably 20 public programs, from installing solar panels to declaring a climate emergency. We had high school students from all over Portland, Bar Harbor, telling what they wanted to do and how they felt about it. We had window dressers and Efficiency Maine talking about energy savings. And one of the things that about the joining the Global Covenant of Mayors is there's 2 specific obligations. One is to conduct a greenhouse gas inventory. We did that, and we published that last year. And another is to create a climate action plan. And we had several public meetings. And in October last month, the city council adopted our climate action plan, which is a big step for us. It does not have specific year-by-year goals, because if it did, I don't think they would have adopted it. We need to have goals that are aspirational and that you can work on from year to year as issues come up. At least that's my assessment of the politics of it. So our next job is to get the climate action plan implemented as things come up. The major goal in the climate action plan is to have the city consider climate issues whenever it decides anything. When it decides whether to have new housing, how to make it climate resilient, roads, sewage, everything. And we've achieved that. So That's what Belfast has done.
Thank you, John. Shay's up next. Shay Conover owns and operates Islesboro Marine, a boatyard, marine construction, and sustainable mussel farm. She has lived on Islesboro for the past 20 years, moving to Maine through the Island Institute's Fellows Program and continuing to support community sustainability at the Island Institute for 15 years before running her own business. She is currently chair of the Islesboro Select Board and also of Islesboro's Sea Level Rise Committee. Shay.
Great. Thanks, and thank you all for coming out tonight. I have a slide, but I'm really just here to tell you about what Islesboro is doing. We started a little bit differently. We have kind of two different ways that we are supporting climate action on Islesboro. We have energy, working on efficiency and renewables and mitigation. And then we have a Sea Level Rise Committee who is looking at our coastal vulnerability and infrastructure needs. Our Energy Committee got started first. In 2014, we formed a group. I was not part of it. I am more on the Sea Level Rise side of things, so I am happy to report all of the success that our Energy Committee has done, which is tremendous. But I support them, but I'm not here to take credit for all of the work that they have done, because it is remarkable. In 2014, a group of citizens got together to start working on efficiency measures on Islesboro and bring the power of kind of bulk grouping to helping make sure that when folks come out to do an energy audit, that they have more than one household to do, just making it easier to do, given the fact that we live on an island. They also started holding annual energy conferences. So since 2014, they've held 6 energy conferences to share information similar to what CamdenCAN is doing and just getting the word out there about what other people are working on. In 2017, the town formed the Islesboro Municipal Energy Committee, and they started focusing on what, as a town, we could do to both understand our town energy consumption, how we could focus on reducing that through efficiency and also renewables. So since 2017, all of our streetlights have been converted to LEDs. We've done the efficiency work at the town offices. We have solar arrays at the school that covers 40% of the school's electrical load, as well as an array on the town office building and in our transfer station that covers the majority of our town electrical use. We just purchased a new public safety vehicle. It is hybrid. So we're doing what we can to reduce the load. And then over 2 years ago, we were fortunate enough to be part of Department of Energy's ETIP program, which is, I'm gonna have to read it because otherwise the Energy Transitions Initiative Partnership Project, which allowed us to work with folks from the Island Institute, from the Department of Energy, and from the National Renewable Energy Lab out in Colorado to do a really deep dive into our understanding the energy load, not just for the municipality, but for the community more broadly. And through that project, that set the goal of becoming a fossil fuel free community. We don't have kind of those action items and targets yet, that we're sort of working towards that as we get the final recommendations from that program. But just a tremendous resource in understanding where we currently are and helping to develop recommendations, particularly around solar, for where we could be moving forward. This summer, we were awarded Department of Energy's Energizing Rural Communities Prize, which was $100,000 to help us start to take action toward that plan. And a big part of that is in hiring two coordinators to help move things forward and to share information with folks in the community. So they just came on board. And the Municipal Energy Committee continues to work with the Islesboro Energy Team, which is the citizens initiative that started in 2014. They all remain active and are working together to make sure, kind of as a municipality, we're doing what we can, and that we're sharing what we have learned, that what works, and bringing it into people's homes. They had a bulk buy heat pump workshop last night at the library, hoping that we could get 5 heat pumps installed in homes before the end of December. They had 28 people sign up for that program. So it is really exciting, and there is a lot of positive energy. And I think capacity is something that you will continue to hear me talk about, and how we need to move things forward. Transitioning to sea level rise. In 2017, we worked with Ransom Consulting who did some storm surge modeling for us into particularly vulnerable places on the island. One is the Narrows, which is that narrow spit of land that splits the island in two during major storm events, and then also a low-lying area on Ferry Road, which is our only access to our ferry on and off the island. That really underscored for us the need to do more planning. And it wasn't until 2020 that we formed a municipal sea level rise committee. That hit pause and really started in earnest at the end of 2021. And I have to say that for folks that are looking to work on coastal infrastructure, having Esperanza and Parker and Gabe in the room with you while you're doing that is a huge step forward and asset. They have been really helpful in helping Islesboro move forward on our coastal infrastructure work. We started by completing the main flood resilience checklist. We enrolled in the Community Resilience Partnership and received funding to bring on a part-time project manager and start some engineering work. So actually, I'm hopeful that next week we will be able to announce an engineering firm that we plan to be working with to do an alternatives analysis, helping us look at infrastructure needs at the Narrows. I think one of the things that we've struggled with as a community is wanting to be as progressive as possible in how aggressively we can plan for sea level rise, and making sure that we're taking the long view with that. It's been a little bit circular because we just haven't had the technical expertise to really understand what are the infrastructure solutions and what are the cost jumps when you go from raising the road to installing a bridge. And we are excited to have an engineering firm come on board to help us assess those options and recommend a path forward. I think widely we've been fortunate in that our community recognizes the need to do something and take this action. I think the next large hurdle for us is going to be the price tag that is likely to come along with the solution that is recommended, and understanding, developing a plan for how we're going to fund that and what the timing for that shovel in the ground looks like for our community. And then I think across both of them, really there's a lot of good momentum to build on, and it is all volunteer driven largely. We've been fortunate that we have part-time consultants that have been working with our energy team and with our sea level rise committee. And I think as a town, we have started to really wrestle with what additional professional capacity do we need to bring on to make sure that we can continue to put the action in place that we're putting in the planning, that we're in the planning stages now, that we can really turn that into action. So thank you.
Thank you, Shay. That was great. Okay, so Gabe, you are up next. Gabe McPhail has lived on the island of Vinyl Haven for 15 years. She owns and operates Resilient Communities, L3C, a planning organization focused on building community and climate resilience. Gabe also manages a regional collaborative supporting Southern and Mid-Coast Maine communities enrolled in the Community Resilience Partnership, which was developed through the Maine Climate Council work, is an active member of the Vinyl Haven Sea Level Rise Committee, and helps manage Vinyl Haven's downtown project, a multi-million-dollar infrastructure improvement project incorporating climate adaptations. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Esperanza. I think in my presentation, you'll also notice some similar themes that we have going around the table. So I'm going to share mostly about the Vinyl Haven Sea Level Rise Committee, how the committee got started, the projects that have led up to what we're doing now. So we started, really the idea came about in 2014 when the town was asked to review FEMA flood map revisions. That's when FEMA put out new flood maps. And it changed a lot of the flood zones from an AE zone, which is sort of less in flood insurance, to the more high velocity zone, or the VE zone. And that really changed dramatically what people were paying, were going to be asked to pay for flood insurance. And so the town started to question the maps and wanted to learn more about the impacts of flooding due to sea level rise and storm surge as well. So those questions, coupled with the fact that the town was sort of long overdue for infrastructure improvements, the town decided to appoint a 7-member sea level rise committee with a twofold mission. And that was first to really start to assess and understand what the impacts of sea level rise were to the island community. And then also to look at flooding events, storm surge, mostly focused on what were considered coastal hazards. And then to take that information and work with the select board to educate the community, as well as to provide some recommendations to the select board in terms of resiliency actions. So that mission, you'll notice, does not include climate at all. It does not include climate mitigation strategies or emissions reduction. So that's really intentional. The climate, the social climate at the time on the island was very much that we needed an entry point that everyone could align with. And so we chose, or the town chose, to take that flooding perspective, and focus on adaptation instead of climate mitigation. And so we really found an entry point with like emergency management and dealing with flood risk. So that's how the committee started. I'll go to the next slide if that's possible. I'm not sure if it is, but well, it's fine if it's not. But so what the Sea Level Rise Committee ended up doing was just start to learn. So along with the town, began to explore what was out there for studies that we could participate in, and projects that we could collaborate with other entities on. And I will just stress that, like, I think everyone's story here is going to involve like multiple project partners, different various funding sources that are available. And I will mention some of them. They're by no means all of the folks that we have worked with and continue to work with. But you can't, definitely, there's no isolation here. We can't do this work alone. So I'm just going to sort of review our timeline and the work we've done to get to where we are now. And again, this is not absolutely everything. But once that committee was formed, one of the first sort of pivotal opportunities that we had that kind of began to get people thinking about resilience actions in relation to our downtown was we applied for a technical assistance grant called the Design and Resilience Team Grant. And that was a immersive weekend of working with some technical assistance providers, architects, engineers, who came and worked with the community through some focus groups to help us envision some options to address resilience challenges that we had identified. And it ran the board across the board in terms of housing shortage, impacts of flooding, really maximizing economic opportunities that the island might afford. And what we came away with was a nice little report, but mostly visuals. And you can kind of see it under where it says Design and Resilience Team. That's one of the drawings that the landscape architects produced for us. And those drawings just really propelled us forward into talking as a community and just really looking at what ideas are out there. We did a vulnerability assessment with Ransom Engineers for our downtown. We also did a sewer climate adaptation plan. And we did, like Owlsboro, our community did the flood resilience checklist process. So all of these, again, were funded through various state and I call them like lower barrier grants, and through work with multiple project partners. In 2016, we started a downtown master planning process that we ended up finishing in 2019. And that has really sort of launched one of the projects that we're working on today. We also had a bunch of other studies that we worked on with the Island Institute, an economic impact study. We did a collaborative project with other Penobscot Bay communities and islands that looked at the impact of sea level rise to our ferry infrastructure. So I'm going to jump to the next slide, which talks about sort of where we're at right now and what we're doing. So all of this learning kind of culminated into a report that the Sea Level Rise Committee put out to the community, our 2020 report. And what it really did was outline a plan of work for the committee and also maybe for community partners and for the town itself to explore. And the areas that we were looking at were essentially like, how are we building resilience throughout the community, looking at vulnerabilities, not just to infrastructure, but to the environment as well. And then how are we going to adapt infrastructure? And there was also a big component of community engagement in that scope of work that we put out. So the current projects that we are working on as a result of that, putting together that work plan, our primary focus has been over the past 4 years has been data collection. So we have two primary data collection projects. One is sort of, I say it's loosely citizen science because it's not sort of an anyone, anywhere type project. It's a group of volunteers that have been trained to collect data. It's called Tide Trackers, and that's to monitor tide levels. And then we have a newer project that's a tide and weather station monitoring at our ferry terminal. And we're also hoping to install some other sites, and that's digital monitoring. And again, that has been funded by multiple partners, and we work with some great technical experts on that, including folks from Gulf of Maine Research Institute and from NOAA. We are also providing support as part of something that came out of our 2020 report and also from our downtown master plan is our downtown project, which is a significant infrastructure project for our downtown corridor, which is essentially like 0.6 of a mile, but it's where so much of the town infrastructure is. So that is taking resilience into account in terms of how are we adapting to the to sea level rise and storm surge in terms of drinking water improvements by putting in a new water main, some sewer climate adaptations. There's a stormwater system being put in to manage precipitation. There's raising of roads and sidewalk and parking lots. So there's a bunch of different resilience actions that are coming through that downtown project. And then, as I mentioned at the outset, we have been focused on adaptation, but in our 2020 report, we acknowledged that we needed to focus on mitigation. So we are beginning to adapt and add new members to our committee. We're expanding our committee, and we are also in the process of broadening our mission statement. So what we're hoping to do is continue working on some climate mitigation goals that we are hoping to move forward. So joining the Community Resilience Partnership has helped us to start working on a LED streetlight conversion with our neighbors, North Haven. We're going to participate in climate ambassador training through A Climate to Thrive. And we're also hoping to just scope out some other mitigation projects. So that climate work is new for us, but we're looking forward to furthering that along. And I think I'll end with that. I just want to say quickly that, this work, I feel like there's so many avenues that make it successful, but really for us, I think some key things have been with the municipality providing capacity to make sure projects can move forward, having access to some level of funding, and knowing that as a town, we have to be willing to commit funds to resilience projects, not just planning, but to over time garner that matching funds, those matching funds that are needed to help us implement larger infrastructure projects. So I'll leave it at that, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabe. Awesome. So next up is Bill Bowe. Rockport's Bill Bowe is a retired environmental consultant who supported multinational clients on contamination, compliance, and due diligence matters. He is a member of the Rockport Conservation Commission, currently focusing on water quality monitoring, completing a greenhouse gas emissions inventory for the town, and developing siting options for a new wastewater treatment facility.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This first slide is, Shay, you mentioned that you did a bunch of modeling, hydrogeologic, or a model for sea level rise. We're fairly new to this business, so this is our modeling right here for sea level rise. That's Abby and Jason trying to figure out how to navigate the December 23rd storm. And for anyone who wondered why our new town landing was 6 inches higher in the summer than it was in the winter, that's the reason right there. The wave action just pushed it right out of the ground. So it was a stark reminder of the kinds of things that can happen, even though you don't expect it. And that's about 50 feet from Abby's office, so she was none too thrilled with the concept. So, as I mentioned, we're relatively new to this. You can go to the next slide, Esperanza. About 2 years ago, Megan Dwyer and I are both members of the Conservation Commission, realized that we really hadn't undertaken any efforts in the town of Rockport that were, from an organized perspective, what you all are trying to do here in Camden and others had done in some surrounding communities. And she and I sat down and thought, all right, what are we going to do here? So there had been some past work done on the town solar array and at the town office, and we did an LED conversion in 2020, which, doing the greenhouse gas inventory assessment, personally, I never knew as much as I now know about streetlights, but it's all good stuff. And we put some heat pumps, some mini splits in at the town office back in 2022, and we had some funding for that. And some of that was actually funded by the solar array on the town office. So there were, positive things, but there wasn't really an organized effort in the town. And so as we were starting to noodle through this 2 years ago, almost, it was like December of 2021, The Community Resilience Partnership came out at the same time. And one of us, I don't remember who found it first, we said, look at this. I mean, that's a roadmap for us to start figuring out what's going on. So we applied for a grant in the August timeframe, a little over a year ago, and were awarded about a year ago to conduct some activities within the town of Rockport. We had always been doing some water quality monitoring for the last 10 years or so. We monitor the harbor, we monitor the streams going into the harbor, and we monitor our lakes for all sorts of things, from phosphorus to bacteria to dissolved oxygen to temperature, et cetera, et cetera. So we had a champion by the name of Bob Kennedy that was doing that on behalf of the Conservation Commission, and he did a wonderful job having this massive database. So we feel really good about our water quality and what's going on with it. And when something changes, like the algal bloom this summer, we had a sense for saying, oh, that's something new, and we figured out what it was. And, you know, we were able to tell, frankly, residents, don't panic, this is what it is and why, et cetera, et cetera. So we were able to, you know, that was an example of sort of an environmental related endeavor that we figured out through time that we had put into it. But about a year ago, we were awarded a grant from the Community Resilience Partnership to look at vulnerability assessments on the ecosystem side, which we're getting some help from Forrest Bell and Associates on that piece. On the social vulnerability, where Amanda is actually helping us out with that. We've got an infrastructure vulnerability issue, and that anything from the harbor to some flooding we've got in some certain areas with respect to stormwater and that kind of thing. We're going to probably internalize that. And then also a greenhouse gas inventory assessment, so we get a handle on what's going on with that. And I'm in the middle of doing that on a personal level, and you'd think it's easy, but it's not. So it's been kind of a fun process. So that's, you know, we're in this massive data collection mode right now. So we're looking at getting that done in the early part of next year. And then in 2024 is going to be a much more robust community engagement exercise. So we had a forum at the Opera House in June of 2022 where we had some folks in this room that participated. Parker was there and some others. And we had, I don't know, what, 75 people, I guess. And you know, we all sat down and thought, all right, what are we going to do? I mean, that's one of the challenges that you have is, and we can all talk about sea level because that's the money issue staring a lot of us right in the face, right? But there's all sorts of other things that might come into play, whether it's ticks or heat stress or, you know, ecosystem shifts. We've all got wonderful natural assets in our towns that we don't want to lose. And if we are going to have to take a look at that, we'd like to know kind of what's going on before it hits us in the head. So, you know, it's an interesting time to try and figure out what are your priorities, because at that meeting we had with the 75 people, we sat down, well, what do you want to do? And everybody kind of looked and thought, I'm not sure. So part of the process is going through these vulnerability assessments and the kinds of things that we're all doing to have that, what we're going to do about it come from that effort, because it's not always obvious what we ought to be looking at. We also had a climate speaker series that we did at the library from February through June last winter. And well, it seemed like winter all the way through June, right? So we're going to do that again this year, starting in February. I think you may have agreed to talk, and if you haven't, you just did. So that's all good. I'm going to do a sea level rise talk in March. I know that I'm doing that, so that's the rest of them I can't remember completely, but that's one squarely right in front of me. So that we're going to pick that up again from an engagement perspective. So the speaker series next year, we're going to have to workshop the results of these vulnerability assessments. It's one thing for a group that's a tight-knit organization to say, this is what we think we need to do. But that might not be what the town's priorities are. So you have to look at all the residents. You have to look at the town management, folks like Jeremy, others, select board members, depending on how you're organized, and get everybody sort of on the same page. That's a massive undertaking. We'll talk about that here in a moment. And we're going to have to also put together a management plan for addressing sea level rise in Rockport Harbor. That's something that's, you know, right in front of us right now. So next slide. So I just put together a few lessons learned things since we're like 2 years into this thing. So from a recommendations perspective, you need to find a champion. And I think you have one here. You're beginning to consolidate that. And, you know, we didn't really have an effort. We had lots of little things going on that individuals were doing. And we had the efforts that the town had done previously, but there wasn't a really cohesive thing. And I think you can now say that, for instance, in the town of Rockport, if there's a climate-related thing, folks are going to say, go see the Conservation Commission. That's their problem. They can help you. So that was a big win for us because it started with Megan and I just on the phone with each other. And that's, that's not a committee. That's just two people. And then the outreach efforts, in our particular case, we needed to really reach out strongly to town management. The town folks, whether it's John Duke or Ryan Thomas or facilities, their job is to run the town. So when you walk in and you say to them, guess what? Sea level's going to be 3 feet higher in 60 years. They're going to look at you and say, yeah, well, I'm trying to pave this road over here right now. Okay. So from that perspective, getting their engagement, and we had John and Orion and some others at a couple of workshops that were put on by MCOG and others. So they start to when you bring something like that up, first of all, they realize that you're not asking them to do something tomorrow. You're asking them to do something maybe over the next 3 or 4 years in order to deal with something that's going to hit us over the next 10 to 20. That's a hard reality to face when you're simply trying to run a town. So, and then they're already strapped. So where do they find the time? I needed help from Megan Brackett, our finance director, on some of this greenhouse gas stuff. And, bless her heart, she's trying to find the time to get me the data, but it's a tough sell. So there's got to be a lot of volunteerism that will work through that. And if my begging and pleading at the school sustainability committee meeting last week works, I'm going to get a couple of high school students in January to help with that. So we'll see how that works out. The other thing that I would say is, stay grounded and practical and solutions oriented. It's one thing when we think about, we all can look at the publications out there and worry about that it's going to be 9 feet higher in 10 years or whatever. I mean, that's over exaggeration, obviously. And that we're all going to have this massive heat wave. It's going to be Phoenix, here in the mid coast. No, it's not going to be. Okay. So it's helpful that, particularly for the people that aren't as passionate as the folks in this room, to explain to them why you're doing what you're doing from a real practical, solutions-oriented perspective. Because that's when you gain their engagement and you gain their understanding that what we're trying to do is the right thing and an important thing. We're not trying to, induce panic in everybody, okay? So that was a big lesson learned from us. And the last thing I wrote on here for anybody that's a fan of the Wrexham show about soccer is like, don't forget to sing when you win, okay? Because a lot of this stuff is, well, some people get real depressed about it. I have a good friend of mine that's very passionate about climate. He's a retired pastor and lives down in Connecticut. And he does counseling for kids who have climate anxiety, okay? And that's a reality. And it's important for us as the adults in the room, however you want to define that, to provide leadership to these kids and to the younger generations, because let's face it, I mean, they're the ones that are going to have to live with this a lot longer than most of us, right? And so getting them engaged in a solutions-oriented sort of practical perspective helps them not get so freaked out over what's going on. And so that's, I would say that in trumpeting, when you have a win, you get a grant or you get some panels installed or whatever, stand up in front of everybody and say, look what we did and why this is a good thing. So anyway, that's about all I have, Esperanza.
Thank you, Bill. And our final speaker is Julie Hashem. She's the Community Development Director for the City of Rockland. In that role, Julie focuses on economic, environmental, and community resilience. This has included helping Rockland reduce energy costs and emissions through solar and energy efficiency, managing a project to redesign Rockland's downtown waterfront for greater storm resilience, and hiring a coordinator to collaborate with the city's Energy and Sustainability Committee and across city departments to advance the city's objectives. Thanks for being here.
I appreciate being here and just the whole idea of sharing information and ideas across communities. And thinking about what to share with you about Rockland's approach to climate, 3 things came to mind for me. The first is we focused on shared responsibility. we're fortunate in that we have a part-time sustainability coordinator, but to succeed with climate and issues related to climate, it's gonna take all of us. Many of the issues are technical, they require engineering, they require collaboration across departments. So we all need to own it at all levels of government and increasingly across the community. Second, we've really focused on taking action. Now, some communities want to plan first and prioritize and then decide what to pursue first. We jumped in with both feet with a number of actions across a number of different areas, and I'll tell you a little bit about those in a bit. And maybe the third thing I'd like to share as a theme is that we really focused on the co-benefits of the things that we're doing. Many climate actions that are really important for climate action make sense for other reasons too. Energy efficiency saves money. There's risk mitigation. There are a whole variety of community benefits associated with active transportation as opposed to vehicles. Talking about the co-benefits engages people in a different way, and different words resonate with different people. Next slide, please. So let's just start with a few thoughts on shared responsibility. So we've got a city council form of government in Rockland, so our city council sets policy. And they were proactive and adopted two goals in 2019, I think. The first was that we were going to be 100% renewable for electricity used in city operations by 2025. We achieved that a few years back with a solar contract. The second goal is, and this one's going to be a much thornier nut to crack, climate neutrality for the community by 2045. We've got a number of initiatives underway to make progress toward that goal, but that's going to be a challenging goal. Another key player in our world is our Energy and Sustainability Committee. So that's a council-appointed committee, so it's a creature of the city. They were the ones that way back when, in an earlier incarnation, proposed those climate goals for council approval. And their role has evolved over time. They've an advisory role to council and to staff. They collaborate with staff on any number of projects. Many hands make light work on a whole lot of different things, and then they have projects of their own. And then there's staff, and I think we have a city manager who really believes that there needs to be collaboration across departments. So we have one department taking the lead on stormwater issues and another with resilience at the treatment plant, and there's cross-department collaboration on what to do with the downtown waterfront, and my department has the benefit of a sustainability coordinator to help with grants and a whole variety of other things. She's taking on a project now with bicycle infrastructure, a whole lot of different initiatives going on. And then there are other committees and other planning processes. We recently finished a comprehensive plan, and the Comprehensive Planning Commission felt very strongly that sustainability both needed to be, and sustainability both broadly defined and very specifically about climate, needed to be both its own chapter in the comp plan, an area of focus, and it also needed to be a lens through which we considered all the other things for the community. We did a harbor plan a few years back, and we took that opportunity to really look at sea level rise and what it would mean for city facilities. We identified some vulnerabilities in that plan and went for grant funding, and that really focused us on the downtown waterfront and two multi-use piers and related landside infrastructure that's at the end of its design life, well beyond the end of its design life, and really needs to be replaced. But repairing it or replacing it doesn't make sense because it's not at a resilient elevation. So that's a big project that we've got underway. It's gonna take all of us to succeed here. Next slide, please. So in terms of jumping in with both feet, I've mentioned a few of these things. I'll say a few more things about the downtown waterfront project. That's the downtown left picture. We've incorporated a whole lot of climate action in that one project. So part of that project, we need to raise the piers and raise the park behind the piers between 1 and 4 feet, depending on where you are, for resilient elevations with a 50-year planning horizon. Maybe my favorite thing about the project is we've incorporated this notion of flexible resilience. So probably the only thing we know about a forecast is it's going to be wrong. So what if it turns out that sea level is higher than the planning scenario that we're using? What can we do in our design today so that 30 years from now, if it turns out we were wrong, they can adapt the facility without a complete rebuild at that time? So we're doing things like in the piers, looking at sectional construction that can be raised up and oversizing pilings and making sure the base of the seawall is set up in such a way that you can go up in height and it can hold that additional weight and stability over time. So that's fun. And then there are other aspects that are climate action more broadly defined, like trying to plug gaps in pedestrian connectivity and better connect the waterfront to the downtown. Preparing for marine electrification with a 50-year planning horizon. We're going to need charging infrastructure, and charging infrastructure for vessels means a whole different electrical setup than we've got in the parks. And while we've got that going on, if you're going to tear apart the park anyway and change elevation, well, you're going to proactively address stormwater and maybe improve your view corridors and pick up some past ideas the community had about some outdoor kind of amphitheater seating in the hillside. So it's an ambitious project with a whole lot of different levels, but various grants have helped us get to where we are with that one. Few other things. So there's a picture of solar panels there. We entered into a net metering agreement. We're buying solar for city facilities, and when we entered into that contract, we also bought the renewable energy credit, so we have the right to the renewable attributes. Then we took those renewable energy credits and we sold them with a little bit of arbitrage. So our credits were worth a lot because they were registered in Massachusetts, and we could replace them with credits from another state where the price was less. We generated more money in savings that way. The solar contract saving us a lot of money. We've also been focused on energy efficiency, so LED streetlights, LED lighting in buildings, heat pumps, whole variety of things, insulation, and really leading by example. And once we have our savings, and over time they're in the millions, we really turned our attention to, okay, how do we help the community save in the same way that we have? And while we had done a number of individual outreach efforts to the community with targeted mailings about efficiency main incentives and opportunities that were out there, we really tried to brand a whole outreach program this year called Recharge Rockland. And it's included mailings and tax bill stuffers on efficiency main opportunities, a variety of library talks, the energy of everything. And not all of the talks are specifically about energy or energy efficiency. One's about the energy of relationships. The things to get people in the door to look at our display about energy efficiency, to hear the intro about why we're doing this series. And it's just reached a different part of the community. I really want to do one with ghost hunters. And then our sustainability coordinator, she's been the force behind implementing a lot of this. She organized an electrification expo at Harbor Park. A few hundred people came. It was a great combination of economic development and sustainability. Here we're showcasing the electric products of local vendors. The e-bike vendors sold a lot of e-bikes that day. electric vehicles, electric yard tools, electric boats, whole variety of things, and the community loved it. There were things for kids. I'm gonna put my glasses on to see what else I included pictures of up there. Oh, at the bottom, the one with the wooden floor, that's a picture of window dressers building the window inserts. They're kind of like an interior storm window made with plastic that help make, for very low cost, a home more energy efficient and comfortable. And that is a project that our Energy and Sustainability Committee took on their own. And they were also a big help in the expo and helping us staff that, organize it, and get the word out. So, let me just see if there was anything else I wanted to say about this. Maybe the theme and all of these things that we've, all right, hold on. Transportation, we've done a fair amount of transportation too. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a minute. Electric vehicle, electric charging stations. We're focused now on bicycle planning, where the focus is really going to be on those low cost and no cost things that could help us get a whole bike network in place in town quickly. Often, at least in our world, folks will have their heart set on this perfect, complete street that's expensive and we might not have the right of way for. We really want to get a critical mass of stuff out there quickly, and then a wish list of everything else that we want to build to toward time, and a good understanding of what needs to happen in order to implement. And then there are a whole variety of things, like Esperanza put us onto some rain barrels that were available. Well, rain barrels are climate action too, because if you're not turning on your tap, you're not using electricity, and you're not using electricity, you're saving emissions. So just positive things all the way around. Last slide. I'll leave you with this final thought. As you know, we've been thinking about all of these projects and activities and trying to develop buy-in for doing them. There really are different words that appeal to different people. And, you know, I think others have alluded to it. If it was all about responding to the climate crisis, part of the community would have been thrilled and part of the community would have been concerned. To the extent that we can talk about being very responsive and proactive about climate at the same time as we're saving money and saving taxpayers real money in the city budget, and we're helping to make a more livable community, it resonates with a wider range of people. We'll be circling back on the notion of climate action planning. We really wanted a whole lot of successes in place about why all these things make sense. We've got our baseline and inventory in place. We're going to be looking at kind of a report sharing what we've accomplished, which we never take time to do, and kind of climate planning light, maybe identifying the next logical steps for the community to move forward with. That's
Thank you. Thank you all. That was awesome. What a collection of wisdom. And how do we bottle it all and give it to other communities? It'd be really great if we could incorporate a lot of these into some sort of guidance, but we'll see. So I'd like to open it up to questions from you all in the audience. And I certainly have some, but I will open it up for you first. Yes.
I'll start because I've got an FYI I hope you'll indulge me with before I ask a question on behalf of my daughter, our daughter, who's going to be on the job market in a relevant field. Tomorrow she turns in her dissertation, systems engineering, with a great long background in disaster response. And she's decided she wants to live in Maine. And specifically this region. So I wanted to announce the availability. She has all my strengths and none of my weaknesses. But my question is, regarding the what do we do now, there were themes. By the way, every single one was interesting, and I thank each of you. one of the big questions is what do we do now? And I wonder, some of you, Camden, I guess, hasn't reached that point yet. And that's going to be one of the biggest obstacles, it seems like, to work through the conflicts of different opinions. And I just wonder your thoughts about the deliberations, the discussions, the negotiations, how you've come to consensus. Any thoughts on that? And I think of two specifics. One is mitigation versus adaptation, which can't remotely be an easy set of decisions. And the other is whether to set specific goals or not, which ranged from no goals because the politics wouldn't allow it, to shovels in ground goals, to completion goals. And any thoughts about the conflict and the collaboration processes?
Who wants to take that on?
I feel, I was the one that said we did no goals specifically, and that's because our reading of the political readiness of the council was such that it didn't seem wise. But what we've done is we've created a situation, I think it was Julie or maybe Bill, who said, the idea now is every decision you make, you look at it through a lens of climate. And so our comprehensive plan also has that. We had one whole section on climate, and then we had climate issues peppered throughout every section. On the theory that until now, comprehensive plans have been built on the idea that the way it's been is the way it's always going to be. And we are adding a fourth dimension of time to that. And we're trying to do the same with our climate action plan, which is to make sure that whenever they're planning a road, a bridge, whatever, they take into account the changes that are inevitably going to come.
Yes, Julie.
I'd say that when you're trying to build consensus, start with the things you can agree on, not the things you don't agree on. And I think everybody can agree that energy efficiency that saves money is a good thing. That's probably the most cost-effective climate action you can do, is to save money through energy efficiency. So you can call it a number of different things depending on who you're talking with, or multiple things for a particular audience, and avoid the debate entirely by jumping in with something that folks can agree on. I'd say on our downtown waterfront, we really very deliberately over a period of years with a very inclusive process tried to build consensus on what to do down there. And some issues were easier than others. I think developing among the steering committee a welcoming attitude toward anyone who comes to the table, and having folks on a regular basis consider the perspectives of folks who aren't there was a big help. And whenever folks got stuck coming up a level to the goals people really could agree on, and going back down again from there. So with that iterative process, even really complicated things, you'd be amazed what kind of agreement you can get to over time.
Thank you.
I'll add, I don't know if anybody else in the room was at the Midcoast Forum on foreign policy, this Monday. It was John Deutsch came in, and he was former director of the CIA, and all sorts of other, he's in his mid-80s now, and I think is still a math professor at one of the Princeton or Harvard, or I can't remember exactly where, someone in this room may know, but he came in to talk about climate on Monday. And he gave an interesting discussion about adaptation versus mitigation, as to whether or not, what was the right approach. And he was at the Department of Energy back in the 70s, he said, as an assistant director. And the DOE director came in and said, I want you to kill all research on fusion. I mean, just a macro decision right then and there. So he went out and found 4 smart people to write a paper and convinced them not to do that. But the point is that there's this massive effort undertaken on a global basis as to whether or not to mitigate or adapt. His advocacy was for adaptation. He says the cost of mitigation is so astronomical, nobody's been able to wrap their head around it. But still at the same time, you want to do the right thing. So it's a struggle that, we think about here in Camden or Rockport or Islesboro or wherever, I think about it on a global basis, we think we got it. They can't figure it out either, okay? And on an economic level, I also went to, and I think there were some other folks there at the school board meeting or the sustainability committee meeting last week for our schools. And there were two things going on right now. I mean, Camden and Rockport were recently faced with a decision whether or not to fund propane boilers, right, at the school. We're giving up a geothermal system, which is supposedly a great, so it is a great system for energy derivation as opposed to fossil fuels, right? But the school district was faced with a decision economically. What do we do? Because the cost of a heat pump was about $500,000 more than it was to just add a few propane boilers. That's a tough decision because were they going to walk to come to the taxpayers and say, I know I'd rather have a heat pump, but it's going to cost $500,000 more over the life of the system. And on top of that, because heat pumps aren't efficient down to 5 below, 10 below zero, and we need the kids to be warm in school, we need to have this backup system anyway. So that's a reality-based decision that they had to look at. And I'm not saying what was right or wrong, it's just that that's the reality of it. The wind turbine's currently not operating at the high school, okay, because of bearing fried on it for the second time. Repair costs are $125,000. Plus they have to pay to operate the turbine. And it generates about $15,000 a year in electricity cost. So how do you do the math and what's important? So these aren't, you can come at it from a philosophical perspective, and I get that, and I agree with that, and that's one of the reasons I'm doing what we're all doing, right? But at the same time, you have to look at the reality of it and say, can we do this now? What's the right answer? And it's not obvious. I mean, if it were easy, then everybody do it, right? And it's not. So it's a difficult conundrum.
I know we don't want to have time for other questions, but I need to weigh in because I said to Bill this morning when he shared that information with me about adaptation costing less than mitigation. I've heard it argued the other way by economists. So, and I also just wanted to put out to folks like I don't think we want to look at things as adaptation versus mitigation. I mean, climate action planning is adaptation and mitigation. And I think, finding points of entry for your community, there are so many what we call like the low hanging fruit in terms of mitigation. As Julie was saying, start with those easy wins. Doesn't need to be, we need to set mitigation goals. You can just start with, energy savings, weatherization, and things we haven't talked about, like sustainable waste management, composting programs. I mean, those types of things too are easy to implement, easy to do. People can voluntarily participate. So there's just a lot of low-hanging fruit actions that benefit from a cost savings perspective that are mitigation actions that we can take.
Just to add, we very intentionally went down the solar path we went down because there were cost savings in year one. There were other solar options where the payback would have been much longer. Maybe you'd get value at the end that we're not going to get because we contracted with somebody, but it was important to us to have totally non-controversial savings year one and over time. And, we're probably up over $250,000 now in savings in our solar contract. So it's real money. And I would say the same on the energy efficiency front. If there's a particular project that isn't cost effective, sure, don't do that one. But there are other things that are going to be. I mean, lighting in buildings is almost a no-brainer.
Yeah, and those are all adaptation issues, right? I mean, I should add.
Well, they're mitigation too.
Well, I guess it's a definitional thing, but we're not disagreeing. We just and I should add the school district's thrilled with their panels. Okay, they think those are great. Not so much on the other stuff.
Thanks. Jeremy, are there any questions from the Zoom participants?
Janice, can you see if there are any questions there?
No? Okay.
No.
Okay. Turn back to you all. Are there questions?
I guess I would just comment. I mean, we haven't gone into Camden yet. Stephanie, were you going to hand this around too? And we're going to do that on the 7th, but think a lot of the things that have been talked about, we are doing here at Camden and have done already. I just don't think people are aware of it. And so we'll get more out there. But we're well on the way to doing what all these communities have done, and in some cases more. So, yep.
That's great. Thanks. Anita?
Bill, Bill, when you were going through your various things, you talked about social vulnerability, and you kind of lost me there. I wasn't sure what you meant by that. Can you explain that further, please?
Sure, and I'm gonna walk the plank for you, Amanda, so if I say something wrong, I'll let you fill in the blanks. But the concept is that, you know, we have groups of folks that may or may not have the level of adaptability that others do. And I mean, simple examples are weatherization. I was able to install a heat pump in my house. I have a whole house heat pump. It's different than the mini split stuff. But I'm able to do that. And from that, I was able to reduce my heating oil costs or heating oil purchases from 1,000 gallons a year down to 250. Okay, I'm trying to go lower. So that's an adaptation that I was able to afford to put in. But there are priority populations within the communities that don't have that ability. So from a social vulnerability perspective, it's looking for those priority populations that could use mitigation measures that they aren't necessarily able to do themselves. And so we have to know who those are. And that can be anything from a flooded road into a community or part of the community that road needs to be fixed and they don't have access, say, to medical care. Or it's they don't have the ability to put in a generator for the house in case the power fails and you're worried about your hot water heat, still petroleum, but freezing in the house, you know, experiencing damage. So what am I forgetting, Amanda? I mean, you're much more in tune with this.
Great definitions, you know, people's ability to respond and adapt to the impacts of climate change and looking at those, you know, to prioritize for supporting with response, adaptation, and mitigation, all of those things. So social, I think, is just one word to represent a whole suite of economic, financial, health sensitivities, cultural information networks, social networks, but it's really just the people factors. If, you know, if there's infrastructure assessment and ecosystem assessment, just making sure we're looking at people as well.
There was Neerav Shah, our old, you know, fellow here in Maine, now at the USCDC, gave a talk earlier this week in Maine Public Radio. He said there were two things. It's too hot, and there's too many ticks. Too many ticks. And I'm boiling down an hour's worth of discussion to those two things. But his comment was, all right, so who's going to be more vulnerable to high levels of heat? And who's going to be more vulnerable or perhaps less able to respond to tick-borne diseases and that sort of thing? So it's trying to understand your communities and where those vulnerabilities are and then trying to address them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Julie?
Okay.
One thought on social vulnerability and maybe a easy action that can have high value. There are programs that will install heat pumps at no cost to people who meet certain income qualifications. Your community action agencies would have access to that. There's free home weatherization for folks who are income eligible for heating assistance through community action agencies. And for folks who are low income who don't go through community action agencies, there are much more generous incentives through Efficiency Maine for people who are low income. So one thing we did was a tax bill stuffer on regular incentives and low income incentives, figuring it didn't matter whether it went to a low income household. We all have grandparents or kids or folks who might be income eligible. So low cost, high value thing that can be done if it interests you.
I mean, we worked on window dressers. We talked about the expo, the electrification one. I was the one that got wrangled into it at that. And Jenny had me up there at the watershed school here in Camden, stretching plastic over roughly 380 windows that are going to be installed. Okay, so that's a lot of houses that worked on that, that needed that window dressers stuff, and that's an energy savings issue.
Yes.
I had a question kind of in the vein of community capacity and grant and fund seeking to hire people. Shay, you talked about, having to identify, in the course of everything you've done, identified a lot of technical needs, professional needs. It sounds like you found funding for a bunch of coordinators, and it sounds like, Gabe, you've also found funding for various studies and things. So that also takes time to look for those things. So I'm curious, in each of your experiences, who really is in the position to identify that need and actually do that work to find funding sources to hire people or expand capacity? Who's taken the lead on that? Is that kind of a volunteer who does that, or staff member?
Gabe. That's what I see you as, Gabe.
Yeah, I mean, to move things forward, you need capacity. You definitely need capacity. So I think it behooves communities to recognize that, and whether it's funded through the municipal budget, like Julie's has mentioned, Rockport has a part-time sustainability planner. And Julie's there full-time. You in Camden, you have planning department with Jeremy and company. And so I would say communities that, don't have that within their municipal budget, using grant funds to hire capacity like project manager or engineers that are going to move a portion of every project forward with their capacity is essential. So, I mean, and then of course, like you're saying, like getting that grant money, I mean, you need someone to actually do that. And then it's not just a matter of writing a grant, it's managing the grant and then managing the project. So within that grant, you have to have that all encompassing within that grant. If a community can't hire capacity, there are fellows programs. The state has recognized more and more that communities need like in community capacity. So there are Resilience Corps fellows. There are a bunch of different programs that are coming online to provide communities with that capacity. So I don't know, Shay, if you have more to add to that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Get yourself a Gabe.
That's what I say too.
We have had support in getting grants to help us get, more support, part-time project managers and that kind of thing. And we also have other town committees who largely it's volunteer driven. And we have really recognized over the past year that we have so many high priority, important projects that we want to move forward. We have a lot of enthusiastic volunteers. And if there are too many town committees working on projects, even if it's driven by very high level volunteers, it puts a level of taxing on the municipal staff too that are not, as far as grant reporting and, budget tracking and all of those different things. And so really as a town, we're trying to figure out now how can we be more intentional in bringing those functions together in a way that both supports our committees to be able to do the work faster and helps our municipal staff not become so overloaded by our enthusiasm.
Yes, Molly.
A question, and you're okay to punt on this one if you want. Julie alluded to it, and it's the ever-moving target of what the heck is sea level rise going to be? And so do you have any advice in terms of, do you just, I mean, consultants will do what they're doing, the scientists are doing, and people are measuring, and I get all that, but we still need to say, there's not going to be the exact answer. So I was just curious if there was any, is it a magic 8 ball that we use, or, is there some kind of a parameter you can give somebody starting on that path?
Sorry. We went with the recommended planning scenario and the main won't wait plan. It might be right, it might be wrong. Good reason to go with it, and then recognize that it may not hit the mark because there are so many unknowns in modeling. And if that's the case, what can we do in our design so that we can adapt later if we have to? It to us seemed like a reasonable, good place to start, because whether it was a foot higher or a foot lower, it would take so much time to figure it out, and we still might be wrong, that we chose to act instead. So I'd say pick a source that is reasonably trustworthy and just go with it, jump in with both feet.
So we're starting to look at bulwarks on our vulnerable harbor. One of the things we're thinking about is retreat, and the idea of multi-use areas. For instance, having parkland where the overwash will happen, so that you're not planning on it overwashing, but if it does, it hasn't destroyed buildings. And we're also thinking about natural shorelines, and those can be a feature and not just a problem. So different approaches.
I'd say too, even if the municipality settles on using the main won't wait recommendation, that doesn't necessarily work in reality across the board, because you're usually adapting around existing infrastructure, and a lot of that may be private. So depending on people's ability or a project's ability to coordinate those private adaptation projects, you may be wanting to go up 1.5 feet or 3 feet, but in reality, everything around you is going to be lower. And so how do you engineer for that? So oftentimes the reality is you need to settle on something that's like going to be good enough or better than nothing. It is likely not ideal. There's certainly ways to do that private adaptation, but that needs to be considered as a huge project in and of itself.
And we've been looking at it from sort of a cost curve perspective. In other words, a foot's going to cost X, 2 feet's going to cost Y, 3 feet's going to cost Z. And at some point, you're going to find that it's no longer sustainable from just an economic perspective. So, looking at that adaptive piece, and, you alluded to it too, John, is saying that, all right, certain assets have to be protected, others perhaps don't. But you look at that as you come up, where's the cost curve flip into not doable?
And this might be obvious, but you match it with the lifespan of the infrastructure. So if it's 30-year infrastructure, you're going to be replacing it again. What are the projections for 30 years out?
Julie?
To just underscore something that Gabe said, it really does depend on the site. So for our site where we're using main won't wait, on 2 sides of the property, just because of the topography and the hillsides, the grading will be very easy. For an in-holding, it's going to be really challenging, and we're fortunate that in-holding is willing to bring up his property at the same time we do ours to make that work. It really does depend, and we've got one part of our site where if we were to really raise to the planning level, it would really disconnect the site from the beach and where folks launch their kayaks. So we came up with a compromise there where we are going to allow it to flood, but it's going to be built so that it can withstand the water going over it for at least what we think is projected to happen in the planning horizon. So absolutely right, it depends on the site.
And just to comment for Camden, I mean, we're in the process, I'm developing an RFP right now for the public landing to make that more resilient. We can't possibly raise our parking lot and the public landing higher than it really is. I mean, think of what that would do to every other adjacent property owner. And to John's point, I mean, there are certain things, you can retreat, right? But not every site you can't retreat from the resource in every site. We certainly can't retreat at the public landing. Where are we going to go? So in the end, we're going to make that area resilient, and we know it's going to get flooded. But the infrastructure that's going to be there is going to be able to withstand that storm surge and withstand that flood, and the water will just recede once it leaves. But the harbor master building is going to be addressed, and the restroom facility and all of our municipal infrastructure utilities down there are all going to be addressed. But likely the parking lot and green space that's going to be created is likely going to be probably at the pretty same elevations that they are now. I think it's the only way to do it.
Anita?
My question actually was about what you're addressing now is this, the complex of the municipally owned land that you can address and the privately owned land that you can't address, and dealing with different levels. Sure, we could raise the landing, but what about those private properties? I went to New Orleans not long after Katrina, and here they were 9 feet below sea level and building big walls and hoping that it would hold back the water, which it didn't. I mean, and then rebuilding at the same level, it's a mess. So I'm wondering whether there's any thought on the part of the government entities that to sort of look at it long range and go, okay, when properties within this certain endangered area are ready to change ownership, does the town then step in and say, sorry, if you're going to go into this property, you need to do something? I mean, I don't know. Is there anything that can be done?
I mean, I think there's anything's possible on the local level, right? You can create all kind of regulations that you want, ordinance requirements, to make people do certain things. The reality of some of that, it's not great. I think modeling the flood ordinance and kind of, we're in the process at some point, I'm going to try to become a community rating system here in Camden. And so our flood ordinance right now, if you have a piece of property and you're building in the flood zone and the first floor elevation needs to be 1 foot above that base flood elevation. In the future, I'd like to bring that up to 3 feet above base flood elevation. Number one, people will get much reduced rates, interest or insurance rates on their flood policy, but it actually plans for the future. That's challenging. That only happens if you're doing new construction or you're renovating a project or a building and spending 50% or more than the fair market value of that structure. Not many people do that because it is so costly. The property itself is costly because it's in on the water. So the value already is through the roof. So it is challenging, but I think municipalities have the ability to craft ordinances to address some of these issues. I think that's what I'm going to try to look at moving forward in Camden, is just being proactive on that side on how we can mitigate and help. I say help property owners deal with this issue. I mean, the reality is that there's no funding for private properties to do projects. There's no funding like that out there. There's funding for municipal governments to do projects, but so I think being proactive and address zoning ordinance and those kind of issues to facilitate mitigation or change in an appropriate way is the only way to do that, I think.
Sorry. So I think, proactive is the word, but sometimes it's sort of, I don't know if you would call it proactive, because the programs that will allow you, it's currently like FEMA programs will allow you to do buyouts And that can be with private property as well, but you need to be like a repetitive loss property. So it means, you need to have had occurrences where there has been damage to that property because of a flooding impact. So and if you take that, if you buy out that property, then it can no longer be developed. So it becomes, open space, and then it gets, reclaimed. So that, that could happen one-off. People could do that sort of one-off with their property. But as an effort for a municipality, it takes a lot of planning and coordination and cooperation. And I think in terms of people need to see that as a like equitable system, in terms of like how we're going to adapt to the impacts of flooding and storm surge. So yeah, again, a person or people could make the decision to do that individually, but to use that like as a strategy, you definitely need a lot of planning and coordination to make that work.
The buyout piece is interesting, and the thing with that though is if you have repetitive losses, you actually have to be in compliance with like the floodplain permitting and ordinance requirements over time. So I think in Maine, we struggle. I think it's a capacity level at the municipal side to make sure our code officers are actually doing what they need to do from a flood ordinance perspective. I think in Owl's Head, I think it was recently, right? There were a handful of homes in Owl's Head, maybe 8 homes that were permitted, built, and FEMA came in and said, wait a minute, these homes aren't built to the flood standards. They weren't elevated to that 1 foot above base flood that I said, and they were permitted by the town. Now FEMA is working with the town, and all these people are having to raise those homes. I mean, these are $1 million homes they're going to have to raise. That's a huge challenge. And I think I think it's a capacity issue on the municipal side. I mean, code officers are asked to do all sorts of things. Generally in small towns, they're a plumbing inspector and handle shoreland zoning. And oh, by the way, you got to do floodplain. And that's like mind blowing, floodplain permitting. So.
Sorry, that's my mother wondering why I haven't called her. Can we have one thought before we leave this particular topic? Is that all right?
Yeah, sure.
I think there's a lot we can do short of regulation in terms of sharing information when folks come in wanting to do things on the waterfront and helping them to understand what the models are showing and what the implications are of not being proactive themselves in their rehab or in their building plans. And some of what is likely to happen with insurance is going to put really significant financial incentives and risk mitigation incentives to building right or building back.
Mhm.
My apologies for my mother.
That's okay. B.
I've often felt that real estate people should have the responsibility of telling new people some of the, way back with blueberry spray, for instance, people would move in, they would have no idea they were going to get helicopters spraying all over them. And, shouldn't real estate people be trained to explain these things to new? Otherwise, how do you reach everybody?
They do, and I will say, I mean, I work with realtors all the time, and I know realtors are sharing the information that they're required to share. I'm not sure every buyer reads the fine print. So, well, I say fine print. It might be regular print, but I'm not sure the buyer actually reads and understands it. Yeah,
Right.
You want to ask me?
No, go ahead.
I wanted to ask if you would all share your experience with outreach and engagement. And I stole your question. In terms of how do you get the word out? How do you engage citizens? In terms of impacts and plans and actions and singing when you win, which I like that phrase. So what's worked best? What hasn't really worked? What are the lessons learned in that way in your towns?
Can I add one little piece to that? And what about in that engagement, what one effort or one project or one event that brought the community towards, being more interested or involved. Does that make sense? And I think you said maybe the expo, Julie, but maybe it's something else.
Oh, interesting. All right, I would say it really varies by project how much the community has been proactively engaged. We've had some processes that have been very focused on community engagement, like our downtown waterfront project. That was a very thoughtful outreach process that had opportunity for people to weigh in initially by survey, open meetings, advertised meetings, project website, outreach to disadvantaged subcommunities in town, and a very deliberate consensus building process to try to help folks reach agreement. Do we communicate as much as we could or should with the larger community? Absolutely not. We barely keep our heads above water, and we need to do more of that and intend to in the year to come. I'd say other initiatives, like when we decided to do energy efficiency in buildings, that was an administrative decision. The cost savings could pay for it, and with communication with council and with the public through a council meeting, we do that sort of thing, but it wasn't engagement in asking the community, should we do it? It was more sharing information on what we were doing because it was within our administrative purview. So circumstance really varies, depends by project. The expo's a good example. That was an effort to engage the community in a different way, and also the library talks, how to get people to come out for fun because something sounds interesting. There were antique cars from the auto museum. There were things for kids to do at the expo. And oh, by the way, they're walking by Efficiency Maine giving a talk, and they're walking by these products, and they're walking by information about incentives. So it was engaging the community in why is Rockland focused on this Recharge Rockland outreach and energy savings through efficiency, and trying to stimulate conversations in a different way. But I would say how well we do and how much we do really varies tremendously by project, and it's probably never enough.
The only thing I would add, because she's absolutely right, is the construction of trust amongst the community. That was a big challenge for us in Rockport. Did the committees that were appointed trust the town management? Did the residents trust the select board? Whatever iteration on that theme that you want to talk about. But establishing trust amongst all those entities so that they can feed back to each other, suddenly you have a much more, foundation of being able to get something done instead of somebody else, somebody out there going, I heard that they're going to hire an engineer and figure out what we're going to do in the harbor, and we're not involved, and daggone it, we should be. It's like, that's just nonsense. And it takes leadership. That's a hard thing to do sometimes because you have to take the time to do it. But it's building that foundational trust amongst those different stakeholders, whether it's town management, select board, committees, general residents. That's the biggest challenge you got.
I think it's important to also not let, and I'm thinking of Camden right now, of not letting that public engagement part drown out the project in the end, because I see it here in Camden sometimes where there's so much engagement that it kind of stifles the actual project. And then it gets put on the shelf for 5 years, and then the issue comes back up. And then community gets re-engaged, and we get the same people to start talking about the same thing we talked about 6 years ago. And then we do, the whole plan, and then it gets put on the shelf. And then here we are 5 years later. And I bring that up because of this public landing project. There's two pieces, I guess. part of it is community engagement and outreach, and we don't have capacity to do a lot of that. So I engaged with Esperanza and Molly in CamdenCAN to be the piece, this grant that we got $60,000 to do this public landing project, and there's a public outreach and engagement piece, and I'm not really doing that. I guess I am as part of this, but this is part of it. But Molly and her CamdenCAN group kind of stepped up to meet that that function for us, which is great. At the same time, on the landing, we did back in 2017 the public landing redesign project, and we engaged lots of people, had stakeholder meetings, and now we're doing the public landing, kind of making it resilient. And we've decided we're not going to re-engage the community again about, what do we want it to look like? Are we going to have more stakeholder meetings? Because we did that already, right? You can't just keep doing those things. You've got to actually do them and then make a project happen. So.
That's good. Shay, did you? have
Sorry,
something?
John.
Yeah, that's great.
No, I mean, I agree with everything that has been said. Our Sea Level Rise Committee has a communications subcommittee within it that developed a really intentional community outreach plan going into the project, holding, community meetings, but then also, that is general invite, but then also going to the sewing circle, going to the land trust board, going to small groups that are already meeting and asking if they'd be willing to have somebody come attend and give a presentation, and started really early with the goal of finding out what people currently were thinking and what their understanding currently was, so that it helps us as we go into the project and engage and engineer, make sure that we were asking them the right questions and the questions that the community had broadly, and not hopefully trying to avoid kind of more of a cyclical, well, did you think about this? Did you think about that? And so we are now going to wait until we have an engineering, once we have recommendations from the engineering firm, that we're going to go back to that, but back to those small groups and to the broader community. But obviously with the understanding that at the end of this, in order to get the project done, we are likely to need to ask at town meeting for significant funds, and just making sure that there was early and often communication before we make that ask.
Yeah, I'm like definitely agreeing with everything that's being said, and just wanted to respond to things in general about outreach and outreach and engagement, and then to Vinyl Haven Sea Level Rise Committee. But I think it's, Jeremy mentioned capacity. It's so important to think about, and I think, Bill, you were saying trust, but like outreach, that commitment to providing the community with consistent means of getting information. And I think it has to start internally within the town government. Like everyone in the government needs to know what each one of them is doing, so they can better coordinate and they can better share resources. And then the town needs to commit to paying for the resource, paying for the capacity that it takes to provide consistent information to a community. Doesn't need to be, some, huge, I want to say, you don't have to like put on a circus all the time, but the website needs to be up to date. There needs to be some level of way that people who don't use online interaction can access information. It needs to be consistent. It needs to be reliable. You need to make it so you can build that trust, because that information is coming out in a consistent and reliable way. And I think if at a minimum, that's what, municipalities can commit to. And it's not that it doesn't take energy and time and money to do that, because it does. But moving beyond that, I think it's really important when we do work and are trying to move projects forward, is like that actual engagement Like an event like this, where we're offering information, you're providing your perspectives, we're using that to then go out in the world and figure out how we might, use what's been shared to further our efforts. But like, if we're actually doing in like an engagement process, like what Jeremy was talking about, and even what Shay was talking about, it's like, how are we going out into the community, inviting participation? We have to do that really deliberately and with a long view plan in mind, or else there's so many, we can go in those circles. We can all of a sudden find people not trusting each other because they thought they were doing one thing and it ends up being another one. You didn't listen to us anyway, and we gave you that information, but you didn't do anything with it. So to think very deliberately and carefully about, do we really want to engage and solicit information? And if we do that, like how are we going to use that in a way that doesn't erode trust? So I think those are just really important things. And I'll just say really quickly from the Sea Level Rise Committee on Vinyl Haven, I think engagement has been a challenge. We do outreach, like by keeping the website up to date. We do outreach through our local paper. But our engagement efforts have not been like, we always do events, we always do this, we have our citizen science, we do some walks and talks in the summer. When we're invited to speak at different events, we do. But I feel like we've been a little shy about engagement because we feel like, and I might be taking liberties and speaking on behalf of our committee, but we feel like we have to be able to offer people solutions instead of just tossing out, hey, everybody, look at all these challenges. I feel like people don't have the energy, and they get fatigued with just sitting around and being like talking about the challenges. They'd be like, great, it's a challenge. Now, how do I deal with it on my, what's available to me? And oftentimes we're talking with citizens and we don't have like, here's some money for you to raise your building, or, Julie mentioned, access to programs through Efficiency Maine or through the community action programs for mitigation. We can provide that information, but a lot of it, especially in our community, has been around adaptation, and to be able to say, well, I guess you're just going to have to get a loan from your bank to raise your bill. That's not really what people want to hear. So we've been a little bit shy about that, like, going out in the community, like sea level rise, it's not really something that we wanted to sort of gather the community around to chat. Yeah.
On that note, I'd like to ask a final question maybe, and that is, what gives you hope going forward?
There's a room full of people here on a on a nice night. It really is people. I think as we have two incredibly engaged committees that are doing a lot of hard work, and the more that we have been able to talk about it, the more people have asked, how can we get involved? And that is how it's going to happen. And it's the community enthusiasm for the work, even though it is often hard, makes me hopeful.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd say, I don't know, I don't spend like a whole lot of time in the hope realm. Not because I'm in the opposite realm. It's more because in my mind, humans have created all these problems, and now here we are like sitting around trying to figure out how to fix them, or some of us are. I just think, it's just similar to what Shay said, this is part of our life, and we can either commit to engaging with these challenges, or decide not to. And I really don't, I think it's an individual decision, and however someone wants to walk their path, that's totally fine. In my mind, I just feel like I'll say, instead of hope, I'll say like the inspiring piece to me is the joy that comes from building relationships and engaging with people who are energized by doing this work. And I like to stay in that realm. And so I would say, okay, that gives me hope. That inspires me that there are other people out there that want that too.
So I would say hope isn't a problem. I'm a glass half full kind of gal and would never survive in municipal government without that perspective. I think what gives me additional hope is, like someone else said, positive energy from all of you folks who roll up their sleeves and try to find agreement or at least compromise when agreement can't be had on really thorny issues, because doing something good for their communities is really what drives them, whether they agree or not. And I would say the other practical thing that gives me hope is we have a once in a lifetime opportunity for federal money to help small communities with big projects that we couldn't otherwise do. So,
Yay.
and, we're trying to get in line.
Yes, there's a lot of money.
There is a lot of money.
Between the two guys now.
Well, I was accused by my mom when I was like 14 of being a terminal pragmatist. Okay. And I didn't know what it meant. So I had to go look it up in the dictionary. But for me, they're challenges. That's all, right? I mean, these are big challenges. And so I used to say back before I retired was, we get some massive project in front of us. First thing I'd say to the team is, it's going to be fun. Come on. I mean, it's just a massive challenge. And you don't need to be overwhelmed by it. Take your little piece that you're comfortable with and take it and run with it. I think that's a blast. I don't know, maybe I tune out the noise too much, or maybe I'm just trying to be, as I said in the talk, just be realistic, pragmatic, and you can talk anybody into anything.
Okay, John.
So a little bit like Bill, I'm hopeful because I don't see us taking no for an answer. I would like you to know that a month before Esperanza contacted me about CamdenCAN being developed, in Belfast, we had just decided to create Belfast CAN, which is actually Climate Action Network, not quite the same as yours, but because we decided that we're just talking to the choir all the time. We needed to get more people involved. So we had a meeting last week where we pulled together 15 different groups. We said, okay, we do a lot of talking about what we should do, and then it never gets done. So how can we create a network or a collaboration or a coalition to actually get things done? And we're going to do it. And it may not be beautiful and it may not be efficient, but we're going to do it. And that's what gives me hope, is that we haven't given up.
Thank you. Jeremy, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I'd love to have these answers.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'd like to give them a really big round of applause. Thank you so much. You guys are champions. And thank you all for coming.
You want a half hour over, huh?